class are now under files or modules?
Both. Week 7?
Week 7 modules. I put them up there at 9 o'clock this morning and was feeling proud of myself, so I guess that I didn't do. Did you move the questions over too?
No, I haven't.
Okay, and Eric is moving the questions over. This is, lucky for you, 2 lectures that I've combined into 1. So we're going to go fast, all right? So get ready. We're going to talk about lots of things today. First thing we're going to talk about is ideological polarization. How did we even get here? The conventional wisdom is that it is elite-driven, that people in power, people at the top of parties, have been the ones making these choices and driving us more and more away from the middle. It does not reflect the, will you change that out? It does not reflect the actual beliefs of real people, and a significant number of people don't move, right? They stay in the same spot. This is Morris Fiorina's work, talks about this. Hill and Tassanovich, they talk about it as well. But there is kind of an opposing view, and that's one we're going to look at today. And it's written by Bill Bishop, the big sword. He's actually a journalist who became so he became a kind of social scientist whenever he started looking at this problem, and he wrote a book called The Big Sort in 2008. Basically, he lived in South Austin, and he saw drastic differences between people living in South Austin and North Austin. Is anybody from Austin or nearby Austin? Relatively familiar with Austin? Yes? Okay. Where are you from? Okay, South Lake, Dallas area. Okay. What about Austin? Do you know enough about Austin? Can you tell me what the difference is between South and North Austin? Anybody? Anybody go to ACL on a regular basis? South by Southwest? You should go. It's fun. All right. So, yes?
I'm saying I'm at ACL a lot.
Okay, and ACL is in South Austin. Can you tell me a little bit about South Austin?
It's really crazy. Oh gosh. My aunt also lives in Austin, and she's like really rich and has a really nice house. But yeah, where ACL is, it's like in this park by the city, and Zilker Park, yeah, thank you. And it's like, I don't know, it's just like a really nice area. It's like really spread out, and then there's like the city. I don't know, that's all I really know.
Okay. Yeah, Conley?
I was going to say also a really similar thing. My aunt also lives there and lives in a nice house. But yeah, like North Austin is like kind of the hills. It's kind of like the nicer part. South Austin isn't bad compared to a lot of places, but it's definitely not as nice.
Okay. But in particular, South Austin is where you get bumper stickers that say things like "Keep Austin Weird," right? And you have lots of music festivals, you have lots of bars, you have lots of live music venues, restaurants, little small shops, things like that. Whereas North Austin is more suburban, it's more spread out. And what we find too is that there's a clear political difference between the two. And Bill Bishop is looking at this and he's like, why would that be the case? And so he starts looking, he says, you know what, I think our polarization is citizen-driven. In the 1960s, people started moving more, moving to places that they wanted to live. So if I were to ask you a question about where you want to live, what would you say? For example, how many of you would say near the ocean? Raise your hand. Mountains? Raise your hand. The desert? Raise your hand. The plains? Right? Small towns or rural areas, suburbs, cities. Okay? So we started moving to places where we felt comfortable. Okay? And what happens is kind of cultural affinity for a certain thing. Like, for example, I will talk about this in a little bit, the difference between my husband and I. This cultural affinity, as it turns out, turns into also have a byproduct of political polarization, right? And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Well, I'm trying to turn this off instead of move this. There we go. All right. So the question is what causes the big sword? And we have human psychology, people flocking to places of cultural comfort. Good drinks. I really like coffee. I like gray, drizzly weather. Scotland is ideal for me. Where should I live? Oh, and I like cities. Where should I live? Yeah. Pacific Northwest, right? Send me to Seattle or Portland, right? Those are things that culturally I like. I also like alternative music a lot, and live music, and walking from place to place. The Pacific Northwest in a city is a good place for me. My husband, on the other hand, really likes a suburb. He likes seasons. For him, right? I mean, he probably wants to live just outside of Boston, right? I mean, that would work for him, okay? And so in terms of what we make decisions about, we end up compromising because we're married to each other, and that would make it awkward. But we are driven by those things. And so you guys, this is particularly important for you. If you think about where you want to live as you're graduating from college, you're going to start applying for jobs where? In the places you want to live, right? Where are you going to apply for jobs? Saudi Arabia it is. He loves the desert. So it works out well. Or Phoenix, right? Okay. So the point is that the desert is going to call him. He wants to go there, right? And so when we talk about that also means that there tends to be some gaps that develop between people, right? And it's based on these cultural preferences, but we start to see that there are political things or political preferences that are connected with it. We also have some culturally based cleavages. So, for example, how many of you, your parents and you attended church or attended a church, and your parents chose to go to a different church that was either more conservative or more liberal? How many of you did that? One? Really? Just one? I'm surprised. Two? Okay. So, I mean, that's three. Okay. So, that is something that people do, right? They tend to find things. For example, in Norman, it's Ash Wednesday, so Catholicism may be on your mind. In Catholics in Norman, know that there are two Catholic churches. One is more conservative and one is more liberal, right? And people choose to go to that church, right? And so even within a particular doctrine or a faith, people are choosing to do this and separate themselves. Why? Why would people do that? And how's that different from before? As an example, I've told you guys that my mom and dad went to a very small two-room schoolhouse, right? They grew up in the Pleasant View community, okay? The Pleasant View community, both the school and the church were built by people who lived just outside of Pryor, Oklahoma. And everybody who lived in that area went to the church, Pleasant View Baptist Church, and went to the school. Their kids went to the school. So, even though they may have had different views, about the reading of the Bible or certain things, they all went there. Why did they all go to that church? They built it. They could walk there. It was really close. It was part of a community. But we've started dividing ourselves really fully. So, we may drive 30 minutes to go to a religious gathering that we feel is more closely hewn to what we believe, right? This is why there's so many denominations and churches in the United States. But it also means that we get really particular. If we start disagreeing, then we go somewhere else. We don't like to disagree. Our lifestyles too, like I told you, walking, proximity to restaurants and shops, healthy pursuits, closeness to sporting events. For me, I want to live really close to campus if I'm going to live in Norman, because I hate driving. I hate it, but I don't. So I have to drive 20 minutes to get to my office. I would much rather walk that, right? Whereas my husband would rather, if he could find another suburbier place, because he loves a suburb, right? Then he would live in that, even if it was further, right? Not for me, it doesn't work, right? So we have a compromise. We also tend to have these tribes, right? And that includes things like, do they still show farmersonly.com commercials?
I got the app.
Of course you do. But the point is farmersonly.com is essentially saying, hey, only date people who are exactly like you, right? Right? And this is your choice. Christian Mingle, the same sort of thing. We also see online, we see the rise of the alt-right white supremacist movements, people talking only to each other on Reddit streams and other things. Bernie Bros doing the same thing, only talking to each other. Turned it off. This gets really personal. In 1960, 5% of Republicans and 4% of Democrats would be upset if their child married someone who was in the other party. In 2010, it was 49% of Republicans and 33% of Democrats. Now it's 50% of Republicans and 38% of Democrats. We're no longer viewing our political party as our views on policy. Instead, it's become our church. It's become our culture. And so what reinforces it? Lots of things. Media transformation. I was talking to my undergrad fellow this morning, and we were talking about watching the State of the Union. And I'll talk more about that later. But I said, so where'd you watch it? He said, on Fox. And I said, so what did you see on Fox, right? And we talked about that. He said, where'd you watch it? And I said, PBS, because that's where I watch things, right? I use BBC or PBS because they're frankly the least biased of all news sources. But we see media becoming more and more biased, and we only watch what we watch. One of my best friends, a scholar in Florida, she lives in her hometown, and she is married to a guy that was an elector for the Republican Party. He's active in Republican Party politics in Florida. Her parents are very active in the Republican Party. She has always been anti-politics. She's a political scientist, but she doesn't really like politics. And so she follows different news streams. And she says, I come home at the end of the day, and we're watching completely different things. He'll say, did you hear about this? And I'll say, no. Did you hear about this? And he'll say, that's not true. Right? We're not even acknowledging that there are other stories out there. We also know that there's confirmation bias. There's this MRI experiment where they put people in, they classified them as being more conservative or more liberal, and they put them into an MRI machine, and they gave the same exact news story. But they started either with, this is Fox News reporting, or tonight on MSNBC. And then they told the same story by the same person in the same voice. But if you were a conservative and you heard, this is MSNBC, they could watch your brain shut down. And the same if you were liberal and you hear, tonight on Fox News, your brain goes flip and it closes. Think about that. Think about that. Whereas if you're conservative and you hear Fox News, your brain goes poof, and it opens up. And if you're liberal and you hear MSNBC, your brain opens up. Think about the fact that we are literally closing down our minds to information based upon what we perceive to be a good source or a flawed source. Advocacy organizations and money have also poured into a lot of the cleavages, right? Dividing them further. And we'll talk more about money later. But we also have this kind of question about brain development. And we don't know if this is the way you're born or this is the way you develop over time. But conservative brains, they in the same MRI machine, they're showing pictures of different things. And a conservative brain was much more likely to kind of show disgust at images that they see than were liberal brains. And conservative brains tend to have a much larger fear center. An amygdala. Haha, said it right today. I always get it wrong. They have a much bigger amygdala. Why? Why would that make sense? If you're more fearful, you're more likely to do what? Stay the same, right? You're much more likely to say, I need to preserve this, right? Much more afraid of change. That makes sense. The liberal brain has a bigger anterior cingulate cortex, right? Which just means much more likely to process things with logic than with emotion. Okay? We can also look at it that way. And my husband and I, we're a perfect example. I'll talk about us watching the State of the Union. He needs a little bit more charisma. I really do not like it. I find charisma to be suspicious. So there's that. The 1976 election, if you look, the black actually, not the dark black, but the black, those are landslide counties for the Democrats. So you guys don't believe me that the South used to be Democratic? There you go. Right? 1976, landslide counties black for the Democrats, and the gray are landslide counties for the Republicans. Okay? All the white ones are where it is competitive. Okay? Non-landslide counties. Okay? This is 2004, actually. I say 2000 up there, but it's actually 2004. The gray, landslide Republican counties. The black, landslide Democratic counties. The white is where there is not a landslide. Now watch this, and it's a little bit harder because I had to use a different source. But the dark red and the dark blue landslide counties in 2020. The pale are non-landslide counties. When you go vote, wherever you are, typically you're voting the same way most of the people are voting, by a landslide. Okay? So what happens is this: homogeneous groups grow more extreme. This creates echo chambers, right? Where we don't have anybody challenging our beliefs. This is a really big deal. If majorities grow, people who have majority opinions, the more that they grow, the more those with minority opinions retreat. And then they stop participating. And then the majority doesn't have to work hard at all. And then there's just apathy. Right? And so you see, for example, Oklahoma having, I think, the lowest voter turnout in 2020. How connected is that to a degree of minority voters, in terms of ideology, retreating? In places where there is less likelihood for competition, fewer people vote. There's serious consequences of cultural cleavages. It becomes high stakes because it's what we are. It's defining us, right? It's defining who we are, what we value. Different opinions actually threaten our way of life, and since we're defending that, whoever is on the other side, anything that they believe about policy is immoral and dangerous. So take these two guys. This was taken this week, or actually 2 weeks ago, at a former President Trump rally in Ohio. Their shirts say, "I would rather be a Russian than a Democrat."
Didn't age well.
Huh?
Didn't age well.
No, it didn't age well. The point is, right? They're saying Democrats are what? The enemy. And understand what they're really saying, okay? Because 2/3 of all corporations
in Russia are owned by the Russian state. The other third are owned by Vladimir Putin or his friends, pretty much. Okay? 96% of the media share is owned by the Russian state. You know how we talked about how the United States ranked got an 83 or an 86 on that Freedom House scale, a B. Russia got a 20. All right? In Reporters Without Borders, out of 180 countries ranked, with number one being the best place for press freedom, Russia was 150. It was 164 out of 195 in terms of freedom on the Economist scale. And these guys from Ohio say, so much better. Opinion is naturally more complex and diverse than black and white. Okay? We have differing opinions, but here's the problem. When people in political parties start changing their opinions, in 2012, 86% of that was a mistake. 86% of Republicans agreed with Mitt Romney that Russia was a serious threat to the United States, 86%. That number became 42% under Donald Trump. People changing their opinions to align with the party. And when you see public opinion align on all dimensions, then other becomes enemy. So how can we have a discussion? We just can't. Extreme districts are going to continue because this polarization we were talking about, they're going to produce extreme representatives. Right now in the U.S. Congress, in 1977, 40% of the U.S. Congress were moderates, which meant they made all the laws. Okay? They had to get people on the left, 11% on the left or 11% on the right. But they made the laws. Moderates ruled in 1977, which meant there was a lot more compromise. Today, the Senate has lost all but 5 moderates, and only 5 to 10% of either party would be considered a moderate in the House. Republicans have moved farther from the middle than have Democrats. They've gone further to the right. There are fewer moderates in the Republican Party than there were, right? But there are fewer Democrats as well. And this predicts government gridlock. Because we don't think about national public opinion. We only think about winning our district. So local opinion is what matters. And it makes it really difficult to compromise, and it makes it really, really easy to listen to money. And we're going to talk about that when we get to Congress. You're going to find that public opinion has very little impact on laws being passed. But the opinion of the top 10% in terms of money is closely correlated. So, Eric's going to take roll. Would you do that, Eric? Thank you. What shapes public opinion on an ideological level? First of all, what is ideology? It is a coherent world belief, the way that we view the world, okay? So I'm going to ask you guys a question. How many of you believe that people are inherently good? Raise your hand. A few, right? I see you guys. How many of you believe that people are inherently evil? Okay. How many of you believe that people are born good or born bad? How many of you think that people develop to be good or bad? Okay. These are your worldviews. This is kind of a key basic thing. Not only that, what's right? What's wrong? How do you judge what that is? Your deeply held values. What's most important to you? This has a lot to do about what human nature is, what we really believe the world looks like, But it is a way that we first decide how it is we're going to view policy. So, political socialization is the process through which we develop our ideology. Party ID, our individual loyalty to a political party, that's a little bit different, okay? Whereas that's Republicans versus Democrats in the United States, liberals versus conservatives, kind of in a broader way, okay? But there are many factors that influence ideology, and I want you guys to remember this most of all. The most important thing that influences your ideology is your family. Your socialization is most affected by your family, okay? And so, to give you an idea of what that means, I'm going to tell you my first political memory. You ready? I was 3, it was 1974. And my father had been working in the yard, and I had been following him around because he was my favorite person in the world. But he really wanted a cold beer. Probably more than anything else in the world, right then, he wanted a cold beer. And so he did what parents do, and he turned on the TV. Well, it was 1974, so we only had 4 channels. ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS. I was only allowed to watch PBS. So he turns on PBS. He's hoping for, come on, you know what he's hoping for. Sure, but specifically he's hoping for Sesame Street, right? He's hoping for Sesame Street, even in 1974, right?
No, I was like thinking that. I'm like, why did he wear Sesame Street?
So it's Sesame Street, that's what he's hoping for, but he turns it on, and he changes channels, and he comes back to PBS. It's the only choice, because the same thing is on all 4 channels. The Watergate trials. In Congress. In committee. And he sets me down in front of it. I'm 3, and I remember this clearly. And he says, watch this very carefully. It's very important. This is why we're Democrats. Think about that. I was 3, right? I became a congressional scholar. I remember watching the Watergate hearings, right? Big influence? Yeah. Right? Here's how we get there. Those are those long-term forces, family, right? But also things like race or religion. I was raised in the Pleasant View Baptist Church. Ethnicity, race, pretty much white in the Cherokee sovereign area. We were theoretically some Cherokee, right? Sex, I'm a woman, right? So that meant that my father said things to me like, don't let anybody tell you you're not smart because you're a girl. Would a father ever say that to a boy? No. Region, northeastern rural Oklahoma. Right? All of this has a giant impact on who I am. School, peers, tribes, the people we choose to align ourselves with. I was just reading some studies about this in preparation for some later studies, in preparation for this lecture today. And here's an interesting tidbit for you. Your college roommate has a bigger impact on your ideology than your professors do. You guys are like, oh.
I don't like my roommate.
So influence your roommate, right? Another thing are things like events or mass media, social media, right? It's become super invasive, super pervasive, right? When's the last time, other than doing your poll, that you looked at social media? Are you on social media right now? Yeah. So it's constant, right? And then there's things like events. So, you know, Watergate, for me, but also as a teenager, the Challenger exploding. I've taught groups of students whose first big event memory was the Murrah building bombing or 9/11, right? A particular political campaign, right? These are the things that have impacts. The further they get away from your youth, the less they impact, unless it impacts you directly, okay? And then political campaigns themselves. So if somebody is talking about something that resonates with you, then it's going to make an impact on you, right? If you're hearing the words that you've been thinking, then you're going to feel connected. Yeah.
Sort of shares with a career that have to be in fourth grade. Yeah, when I was in like fourth grade, they asked us to if we would rather vote for Al Gore or President Bush, and write an essay about it. So it's just a really weird thing that my school had me do when I didn't know anything.
They used to have something called the Weekly Reader, okay? And the Weekly Reader had a presidential election for first graders that was accurate.
We did the same thing in kindergarten at my school.
Okay, I don't know if anyone else remembers, but I remember when President Obama was being elected, and I remember in my school we had the makeshift votes, and I remember people voted for Obama, and I forgot who else, but I remember we all went out to recess, and there was this bias on who you voted, so kids would go up to you and be like, who did you vote for? And whether you said who, they would treat you differently, because maybe for them it was normal to vote for who they voted for because of their families, or what they believe because of their families. I just remember that being a big impact on what kids could view as politics.
Absolutely, and that is politics, right? That's your family influence, right? I voted for Obama. I voted for McCain. Oh, well then, we're not friends anymore, right? Because we've done something. We've turned political opinion into a church, into our religion. We have two dimensions of ideology, and you guys, this in your workbook this week, if you turn this in, it can take the place of one of the first 5 if you missed it, okay? But it's not for extra credit, okay? But you might look at this a little bit, at least in your workbook, before you go to class. And look, there's these dimensions of ideology. Economic issues, there's equality versus liberty. And we fall somewhere on this spectrum between equality and liberty. And the same thing with social issues, between more progressive social issues and traditional social issues. And it may be that on one, you're more progressive, and on one, you're more traditional. That's not unusual, right? It's complex, and it's yours. I think I might be having trouble with my battery. There we go. This is first year student ideology, and so this is when you first come to college, where people are. And if you'll see that blue line at top, that's where most people were. About 50 to 60% were pretty standard moderates. Moderates at their lowest point now, at around 45, whereas the black line is liberal or far left, and this, you can barely see it, but the blue line that's underneath, that's conservative or far right. We're becoming more polarized as even as an 18-year-old than we were 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Abraham Lincoln says, whoever molds public sentiment goes deeper than he who enacts statutes or pronounces judicial decisions. Think about that, molding public sentiment. In the 1950s, when we did a lot of study of autocratic or totalitarian states, we have Paul Keksameti, who did a pretty comprehensive study. And what he finds is essentially this: there's no such thing as public opinion in a totalitarian state. Because public opinion requires that opinions on matters of concern to the nation are freely and openly expressed. Right? If 5,000 people have been arrested in Russia in the last 5 days for protesting the war, is that free and open expression? No. So what is public opinion? It's an aggregate of individual attitudes or beliefs about certain issues or officials, and it's a foundation of any democracy. It's changing all the time. When we look at it, I'm going to show you guys it's at a point in time. And it's hard to measure. And in a democracy, it's almost impossible to control. Unrestricted propaganda bots are an issue, however. Our reliance on social media, our failure to fact-check things tend to influence that. Authoritarian states which own all the media, China owns 100% of the media. It's much more successful. Our population in the United States is highly diverse, and it always has been. When we wrote the Constitution, there was debate over whether we should include English as the official language. And they decided no, because more people spoke German than spoke English. Right? We've always been diverse. It's just what we view as diverse has changed. So group identities are going to shape opinion, because of the experiences that you've had. The population, add to that, is generally uninformed. And because they're uninformed, they have contradictory attitudes, right? I'll probably say the same, well, that's hypocritical. You can't believe that and believe that. Of course you can, if you don't understand the connection between them, right? Here are the consequences for democracy. If you are uninformed, you're less likely to participate unless you are following a charismatic leader. If you are uninformed, political action results in detrimental and unequal policies, which means that money rules if people are unable or unwilling to inform themselves. So many people, politicians would say, I can look at public opinion in my district and this is what they want, and so that's what I'll do, right? And it's central for responsiveness and central to democracy, but again, we're going to talk more about money in a couple weeks. There's some key terms I want you to know. One is efficacy. Efficacy, in sum, means connectedness. The degree to which we feel connected to government. Is it them or is it we the people? Right? Public or political trust is the degree to which we believe the government acts with our best interests in mind. Do we trust them? So does public opinion matter? Well, some things say yes. Bowers v. Hardwick, there's no right to homosexual relations, a 5-4 decision in 1986. Slowly is overturned until we get to a very far different point from that, which is Obergefell v. Hodges. States may not prohibit same-sex marriage in 2015. Now, there's no question that public sentiment, public opinion changed during that time. Did the court follow public opinion? Or was it there were new justices who were of a different generation who had that opinion? No matter what, it does align with changes in public opinion. At the same time, public policy in Congress is disconnected from public opinion. But it is fully in line with the preferences of the top 10% in terms of wealth. Page and Gillen's 2020 write about this. Actually, they started writing about it in 2014, but this is their latest book. Money for donations matter more than representation, it would appear. So, social and political environment, the kind of place one grows up in, lives in, is going to shape your public opinion, right? But also your generation's going to matter. So let's look really quickly. Also at the group level, we've talked about these, all going to have an impact. But let's look at the generation. Gen Z that's mostly you guys, are more likely to want an activist government than any other generation, 70% to 29%. 64% to 34% of millennials, Gen X, it's 53% to 45%, and then boomers, it's 49, and the silent is going to be 39% to 60%. Gen Z and millennials, most likely to say climate change is due to human activity. That's a big change. Look at Gen X at 48%, or boomers at 45%, or the silent at 38%. When you look at one of these, and I often, and hint, this would be on an exam, look at the bottom. This is a Pew Research study of 920 U.S. teens. It was conducted September 17 through 2015 online. It's combined with a nationally representative survey of 10,682 adults, ages 18 and older, conducted online, September 24th through October 7th. So if I ask you, what's the N? Can somebody tell me what the N is? Do you know what the N is? It's the number of people. I will ask this specifically. I will put a poll up, right? And you will not know what the poll is. It will show up on your exam. What's the N? Yeah, Connie.
The number of data points.
What?
The number of data points.
The number of data points, which are? People. And so that's 10,682 plus 920, right? It was conducted by Pew Research. This does not have the error on it. The one I will give you will have the error. If the error is not presented, that's problematic. You sometimes have to look through the fine print. But if the error is more than plus or minus 3, do not trust the poll. Okay? You can also look at who's doing it, right? What was the actual question asked? Because if we ask questions in a leading way, then we get leading answers. Push polls are used to influence opinion. That's one thing that they do. So they might say, for example, hey, did you watch the State of the Union address? How many of you watched the State of the Union address? Okay. Of those of you who watched the State of the Union address, don't you think that this point was good? Is that a leading question? Yes, it is. That's not how you ask that question. What was your opinion on this? You mostly favorable, somewhat favorable, neutral, somewhat unfavorable, unfavorable, mostly unfavorable, right? That's how you answer that, okay? But again, how many of you watched the State of the Union? Raise your hand again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 10% of you who are in college in an American federal government class right now, you're the ones most likely to watch it, right? Other than, of course, your grandparents. Tracking polls are taken on a daily basis. They're really crappy to know what's going on over a short period, but if you take a tracking poll over a long period of time, you can see trends. They don't have as many they don't ask as many people. Exit polls are taken after leaving a polling place. These are not great. You have to be careful about them. And deliberative polls are, if I were to educate you about something and then ask your opinion, I would be asking you some public opinion about something about which you had an idea, right? Most people are uninformed, so deliberative polls are a nice exercise, but they don't tell you what people think. So know the purpose and sponsor of the study, know who's interviewed, know how the survey respondents were selected. Was it randomly? Was it representativeness? How many people were interviewed? Know the exact wording of the questions, know the order and context of the questions, check the interpretation of the data, and recognize that what was not reported may be important. There are lots of shortcomings, that the options are limited, the way that the sample selection is, stuff like that, okay? Here's a poll. More than half of Americans now see the conflict between Russia and Ukraine as critical to U.S. interests. This was actually taken February 1st through 17th. 52% said critical. How many of you believe that it is higher now? I think you're probably right. And then 2015, when we talk about the invasion of Crimea, I said Crimea instead of Ukraine, didn't I? No. So Ukraine, sorry. We're talking about the invasion of Crimea, less important. Okay? So here's my poll for today. This is the same poll that's being given all over the United States right now. So I'm going to compare your answers to those answers and maybe present it to you next week. Okay? Because I think it's interesting. What do you think? Did I start it? Yeah, good. And with whole 1 minute left, which is